Yeah, okay, we are now recording.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining. We have a few updates to go through. The first one that I wanted to update on is just a very quick update on the Presto Conformance program. Last week we discussed the importance of the Conformance program in not only coming up with a framework for for vendors to ensure that their Presto distribution is a properly conforming Presto distribution, but also in terms of the aspect of it helps to define what Presto is and what features are important to us. So we created the mailing list, and we have a draft version of the charter. It's up there on the Presto TSC GitHub repository. We have 8 attendees who have signed up to the mailing list. And I just wanted to send out a reminder, if this is important to you, or if this is something that you would like to participate in, please join the mailing list and get yourself set up there. The TSC charter, the Conformance program charter has been open, and I'm going to be within the next week or so, going to be nailing down +1 votes from TSC members and getting that part finalized. The next steps after that will be we'll be holding off a kickoff meeting to sort of decide the parameters of future meetings, and then we'll hold a vote on a chairperson for this working group. I think like some action items that I'll follow up on after this meeting is please review, if you're on the TSC, please review the charter. And if it looks fine, give it a +1. And once we get a majority vote, we can sort of like get that finalized and push it forward. Cool. Any questions on that? So moving on to the next agenda item, I have the next 2. These are just sort of like minor things. The next one is on the Presto main GitHub repository. We have a series of GitHub checks, but they're optional GitHub checks, and so you can commit your PR anyway, even though the GitHub checks are failing. I've proposed to many TSC members to make these not optional, and to make it a requirement that the checks pass before committing. The idea is that if there's a flaky test, we should create an issue for the flaky test and disable it, or just go ahead and fix the flaky test, and just prevent people from merging PRs that have checks that fail. With the move to GitHub Actions, I think it's also a little bit harder to see which checks are failing. So I would prefer the default to be prevent the PR from being merged, and make sure that the GitHub checks are passing before merge. So I think that I'm actually not entirely sure if this requires a vote, but I would like to proceed on this, like, let's say with, what I can do is I can send an email to the TSC list, and I guess I'll just collect votes from relevant folks to ensure that we have a TSC consensus on this item. But if anyone disagrees with this, or thinks that it's important to have the flexibility of allowing non-passing checks before merge, please let me know and we can discuss. Cool. So it sounds like everyone's okay with that, so we can just after this meeting, I'll send out.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Does this make it
like physically impossible. I'm just wondering, like, for example, sometimes you have like two flaky tests and you want to be able to get sort of one fix in and the other fix in. So if it's like literally impossible to do that, I feel like that could cause issues, but otherwise I like the idea.
It's not impossible. Some people have administrator rights, and so for example, I have administrator rights, and I think that I could override it.
Okay.
But we could also suppress those flaky tests with two separate commits in a single PR.
That's fair. That's all.
Okay, so it sounds like we're in agreement, so I'll send out an email so that we can vote on that after this meeting. The next one, it's also kind of like a minor thing, and it's something that just a quick reminder. Every GitHub PR that is issued in the main Presto repository has a section for release notes. I just wanted to give a quick background on how that's used. So firstly, it is significant and it is important. Within Facebook, where we're still sort of like the main facilitator of cutting releases and doing extensive testing, we have some internal tooling that parses these out and creates essentially like the release notes PR based on the text that's in that PR. So that text is significant. And so before we merge PRs, we need to make sure that for each PR that we end up merging, if there's a release note that's included with that PR, it needs to have that text match our release notes guidelines. So the typical problem that we find before we end up merging these PRs, actually, sorry, after we merge these PRs, are that they're way too technical and they don't make sense in terms of release note. So it's very important that these release notes, basically we take a step back from the technical nature of the PR and try to think of it from an operator or administrator of Presto's perspective. For example, like we might be making changes with the org writer, improving performance. Too much detail would, like an example of too much detail is like you would include like, let's say the buffer size or, something of that nature. Generally much more higher level release note makes a lot more sense for a Presto administrator. And we have guidelines on our wiki about like the shape of this text and the nature of this text. So it's important that before we merge a commit, we also, as part of the review, we go through that release note bullet and make sure that essentially it makes sense for Presto administrators. And I'll also send out another email just sort of like linking to the actual text specifying the guidelines for committers so that we're basically all reminded on sort of like what our expectations are on this text. So there's nothing actionable. It's just sort of like a reminder. If you're a committer and you're committing code, please do take a look at the release notes and try to look at that critically and make sure that like these are suitable to be included in the final release notes PR. So like as an example I think for 251, I think every single bullet ended up requiring some sort of modification. So that means that we can do a better job of making sure that our final release notes are, suitable for merging. Any questions on that? Okay. The next one is an item added by Rebecca. So a proposal to change how we elect committers.
Yeah, so the last time that we elected a new committer, so there were 16 committers as part of the Presto project, and we require a majority vote. But actually 4 of the committers weren't actively working on Presto or weren't available. So the majority of 9 really ended up being sort of 3/4 of the committers that the sort of the official list of committers, or not the actual active and available committers. And so I feel like it's just, as the project sort of goes on, I feel like this is a problem that's gonna just continue to happen. And so I was proposing that we use lazy consensus for nominations, where we just leave the vote open for a certain amount of time, and if there are no objections, then we can proceed, and that way we don't have issues if people are not involved with the project or are on vacation, that it doesn't hold up establishing new committers. And then so that's the proposal. If anyone has any feedback about it, or
Hey, Rebecca, this is Gail from LF. So this might be a good time, considering I know probably like over a year ago, we started talking a little bit about sustainability around membership. And of course, then pandemic happened and all of our priorities got kind of stressed. This might be a good time to review the current committers and see if everyone is still interested in participating. Another alternative is some of our other projects do like a yearly, once a year, the voting members are kind of redecided. So that's a matter of, you separate, right? In our current charter, committers are separate from voting members, and the voting members were kind of been established at the beginning and haven't really seen a lot of edits, but of course people move on to new projects and their priorities change. So this might be an opportunity to revisit how voting members are decided, and either one, go ahead and say, I'll just audit the list and ping people and see, hey, are you still even working on this? Do you want us to remove you? Or another option is to say, okay, how many seats do we want as voting members, and do we want to kind of do like an election every year? So for example, we're doing this in Continuous Delivery Foundation, and CNCF is the same thing, where it's an annual election for, like, we just have an election for the chair here, but they have an election for the entire set. And then they have different types of representatives that they sort of elect. So that's another option for how to go about it. Just do a yearly election for everyone. That way, that everyone continues to want to be engaged. Or we can just do an audit and check in and just see if people still want to be voting members. That's just some feedback.
Yeah, I mean, just the way committers are elected, it's not. I guess the committers are elected by other committers, and so they don't have to be voting members of the TSC. So I guess it's a little bit different, but it probably is worth, in general, doing the audit. I know, at least for the time the last vote happened, 2 of the Facebook committers had recently, just a week or 2 earlier, stopped working on the project, and so I feel like that's a little bit trickier. But
so Tim, if you wanted, you and I could take an action item to reach out to kind of all the current voters. So I want to make sure I'm also understanding your question, Rebecca. I think I may have misheard. Are you thinking about voting members? Voting members are the ones who vote on everything, or just the committers list, or both?
So my understanding about the way committers are elected is that it's not limited to voting members. It's the majority of the full list of committers.
Okay. I need to check our charter to see if we have any special criteria there. I know, like, April of last year, you guys had a vote around separating out committers versus voting members. So I can take a look at that. What if I pull that stuff out and send it to you guys as an email, like kind of just the right stuff highlighted, and then you guys can decide what you want to do with that?
Yeah.
So I have some thoughts and suggestions. So obviously I come from Apache land. I'm still a committer on Apache Cassandra, and also a PMC member, and no one has had to do anything for the project to move on without me, because Apache just relies on lazy consensus. And like, I think that that's kind of the only tool you need. And there's some things that are I find kind of mixed up about, and this is kind of a second thing. Our charter with the distinction between committer and TSC member is not always clear. And like, in my opinion, like onboarding into a project and becoming more experienced and having, you know, more control is kind of like a pyramid, right? You start as a contributor, and then you're a committer, and then you're a TSC member. And I think at the TSC level is where we should start having votes for, you know, who's ready to become a committer. Because just because someone's a committer doesn't necessarily mean they kind of, you know, are ready to enforce the culture of the project. And I think we kind of ended up in a place that I don't really like, where we have a limited number of TSC members because we don't rely on lazy consensus. Like, our charter very much looks less like an open source project and more like a corporate boardroom. I was never a big fan of that. And I hope maybe some way we can iterate away from that. But, you know, I know there's other views.
I'm pasting in, hopefully, the link to the section of the charter where we talk about the TSC. So in section, I'll just screen share. Hold on. Pull this tab out and you'll see. Sorry, everything.
I just want to say one thing. Another big advantage of lazy consensus is that it just simplifies everything, because you do all your votes on the mailing list. And if someone doesn't bother to show up, it's their problem. It's not the project's problem. And it really is biased towards moving forward and not having a lot of bookkeeping around who's a member of the project, who's not a member of the project.
So I just wanted to share this as part of to help with your conversation around this. This is the section, this is the technical charter. It's in GitHub under the TSC repo. And it's kind of like you explained what Ariel's talking about. There are contributors and committers. So explanation there of contributor versus and then a committer. The part that was added last year, a committer by default is not a voting TSC member. An existing TSC voting member can nominate a committer to be a TSC voting member. So they are separate. You'll see here, a contributor may become a committer by a majority approval of existing committers. A committer may be removed by a majority approval of other existing committers. So that, I know we had at the top, so unless TSC said otherwise, committers will operate using lazy consensus method. So if you, it does kind of already have that in place. Lazy consensus is permitted.
I guess like that is something that I was not clear on. So it's like I read that, and to me it sounded like commit, like the day-to-day of the committer, like reviewing and you know, like approving PRs and such. That is what was operating with lazy consensus. But I guess like what you're saying is that we can interpret this as even new committers could be onboarded using lazy consensus.
Okay, I hear the difference now. Sorry, I was not following properly, but yes, that's right, Tim. So the way you currently operate, and you can change the charter. That's totally up to you as a TSC. You change that, submit a PR, hold a vote on that. Is that the way committers are added? So are through that majority votes at section 3 right here, D3. And then as far as your operating procedures, that's using lazy consensus. So if you want to operate by voting in new committers using lazy consensus, that's something you can easily change. It's not an intense change. You can just say, okay, let's update the charter, have a vote on the charter, and then it's updated. So it's totally up to you guys.
So there's a separate section for TSC voting that defines all of it. I don't know if you mentioned that just now. And that's why I think the TSC operates under different rules.
Yeah, and you can, as a TSC, if you decide that you want to change how votes are held for different things, that's absolutely up to you, and you can definitely do
that. Like as a path forward, we could propose like starting off with, you know, lazy, you know, like adding lazy consensus for introducing new committers. And we can consider this for TSC voting, but it's not onerous, because my understanding is that it goes based off of the participating companies. And so only, like currently, for example, I think only 3 votes are significant.
That's like until, so participating companies doesn't apply to, like, you don't have to pay. It's just more of like who's represented. So when we started off, we had a higher number of Facebook representatives than other companies. So we wanted to make sure that it was more balanced. And so that's, while they're under 6 diverse communities on the TSC voting list, then it's 1 vote per company. When it exceeds 6 company representatives, then I think the criteria changes. And that was to make sure that we, when it was 8 Facebook employees and then 1 from Uber, their votes are counted equally, right? So there's an equal weight to each. Rebecca, that's a really good point. And you guys have been growing and maturing. So it's definitely a good time to think about and talk about how you want to keep growing and bring in new members.
Okay, so for the next step, I guess I can submit PR to the charter to change that section about how committers are created, and then they can put that to a vote.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think last time you guys did a charter change, you held it like open for discussion for a couple of weeks. I can check the email records, but there was like whoever proposed it said, hey, here's my change. Please contribute discussion for, a week or 2 weeks or whatever. And then you guys held your vote.
Okay, that sounds good.
Cool. Anything else on that? Right. So while we're on this topic, I think Andre is present, and Andre actually would like to nominate someone as a committer.
Yeah. So I don't think we have a quorum here, so most likely I'll have to send a nomination letter anyway, where we all can vote. But just as an FYI, yes, I would like to nominate Ariel as a Presto committer. I'm pretty sure everybody should know Ariel. He's been very active with our community since the very dawn, since the inception, helping to create Presto Foundation, establishing community guidelines. Also, he's been working very closely with many companies to get them engaged in the community. So up until now, he's reviewed more than 100 pull requests with a total of more than 32,000 lines of code from like 30 different authors. 12 of those authors are actually external contributors. One of the contribution that I think worth highlighting is basically he helped landing Hive 3.0 migration. That was a large contribution from the community and highly desired. Also, from his own contributions, he introduced additional partitioning strategies to better handle skewed queries, improved memory utilization and reporting, memory limits enforcement, and also memory footprints for some operators. And also he's been working on things like Travis migration, Docker Hub migration, that kind of was needed to keep the lights on for the community. And still he's one of the most active engineers on the Slack channel, trying to answer questions or loop in experts in the area. So at this point, with all of this said, I think he meets the committership bar. He can provide a quality review. And usually when Ariel asks me to commit something after he's done review, there is like nothing much to add from my side. So from my perspective, he meets the committership bar. And yes, here is the nomination. So I would really love if you guys could support that. Thank you.
Sounds good. I don't think that we have a majority of committers on the call, so we can follow up, I guess, by email and maybe we'll wait for Rebecca's proposal. It would certainly be easier with Rebecca's proposal, but I'm pretty confident that this will go through. Thanks for adding this nomination.
Thanks for considering me.
Cool. That's all that we had on the agenda today. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to bring up before we close it early? Sounds good. Thanks for attending, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.